the lessons that you have to learn in your Saturn return are all trying to get you to step into adulthood. There's all this information online about the theory of it all. I documented every single thing that happened to give a real person's story of what it was like. As I was going through my Saturn return, there were very little resources online that showed real stories of people going through their Saturn return and what that actually means. Now, I ended my Saturn return when I was 29 years old. I'm now 31. So I am fully on the other side of it. But what I did during my Saturn return was I documented every single thing that happened in relation to where the planets were. When did Saturn return to this specific point in my birth chart where it was when I was born? I documented everything. So I'm here to share exactly what happened at every point in time, just to give a real person story of like what it was like. So this is what we're diving into today. Welcome to Secret Garden. Let's get into it. Now, if you're here and you're like, Allie, I don't give a fuck about astrology, let me offer you this. Think about what was happening in your life from the ages of 28 to 30. Was everything just like chill? Were you experiencing major milestones? Were you experiencing just a lot of like funky things happening in your life? All that you were experiencing between the ages of 28 to 30 have to do with your Saturn return. Now, if that period of time was easy for you, that means you were learning the lessons. If that period of time was like particularly turbulent for you, it's because you needed to learn the lessons that Saturn is asking you to learn in this lifetime. Now, if you're here and you're like, Allie, hell yeah, I love astrology. I want to learn about my Saturn return. I'm either approaching it, I'm in it, or I'm just on the other side of it. And I just want to hear a real story of like, what the fuck happens in a Saturn return and what are we supposed to learn? You are in the right spot. Now, I am merely just an amateur astrology person. Like, I read the theory of the things, but more so what I care about is like, how is this going to impact me in my real day-to-day life? If we're lucky, we'll go through 3 Saturn returns in our lifetime. The first one happens between the ages of 28 to 30. The second one happens between the ages of 58 to 60. And then the third one, if we're lucky, happens between the ages of 88 to 90. And with each Saturn return, I'd imagine we're asked to progress in the same themes. So constantly moving forward, it's going to be a different flavor of what we're having to learn related to these lessons, but it's all pushing us to learn what we're supposed to learn in this lifetime and overcome what we're supposed to overcome. And, you know, I think when I think about the first Saturn return, and I'd imagine this is similar for all of them, but particularly with the first Saturn return, it's really pushing you to figure out who you are. The universe was giving me all sorts of clues to help me answer the questions of who am I? What am I truly about? What are the foundational things that make me me? The ultimate question that Saturn is pushing us on is, where are you not stepping into adulthood? Now, another interesting thing about my Saturn return that is not typical for a lot of people is that Saturn actually returned to the point in my birth chart 3 different times within this first Saturn return, because it was going forward, backward, and then forward again. Now, what does that mean? Because there's definitely not a lot of information online about that. So I'm really going to dive into like, what did each of those 3 steps truly require of me? What was happening at that time? And how can we learn from that sort of forward, backward, forward again experience? Okay, so really, like, what is the Saturn return? It pushes you to question what you think is stable, and it requires you to really develop a whole new sense of stability. It has you reevaluate serious commitments, and it's really pushing you to find a real answer to the question of where are you not stepping into adulthood, and it's requiring you to take action and follow through in building your newfound sense of adulthood and stability that comes with that. While Saturn is known as like the taskmaster planet, and it pushes you to really confront the shit in front of you, it also rewards you on the other side if you do that. It also kind of brings you face to face to this thing of, yes, our time is limited, but we also have a lot of time left. And the shit you kind of have to go through depends on the sign and the house that Saturn was in when you were born. So for me, Saturn is in Aquarius in my 3rd house at 24 degrees. When I really kind of dig into, okay, what does this actually mean from a theory perspective and sort of a real life perspective, I like to look at Spirit Daughter a lot because she writes about what this all means. And, you know, when I look at what she's saying about, okay, what does Saturn in Aquarius mean? It means there's this overwhelming sense to be responsible to the collective and to make the world a better place through your work and commitments. So you'll feel a need to commit to a vision, and Aquarius is really asking us to break the mold. And the 3rd house represents communication, learning, and our immediate environment. So it challenges your communication, your thoughts, your perception, and it really pushes you to find your voice. So in my case, Saturn passed 24 degrees in the 3rd house 3 different times. The first pass of my Saturn return happened from April 26th, 2022 to May 18th, 2022. And during this first pass was when I was really getting a glimpse of all the lessons that I had to learn. And the area where I was really being pushed to learn these lessons was surrounding my living environment, my immediate environment. And at the time I was living at my parents' house. A couple years prior, I had moved back from Chicago, and, you know, I moved into my parents' house thinking like, oh, I'll only be here for a few months. But then COVID hit, and 4 years quickly passed, and there I was still at my parents' house. And, you know, I sort of rationalized it as like, oh, well, I'm saving money, and this is the right thing to do because I'm saving money. But, you know, then I found myself in a situation where I just needed to quit my job. And then that meant that I no longer had a source of income. And, you know, I quit my job to recover from burnout. And that was a very intentional step that I made. But it also meant that I didn't have an income source. And so when I didn't have a source of income, these feelings of like scarcity mindset and this need to remain at my parents' house became even more at the forefront of my mind, because I'm like, well, I don't know how long I'm not going to have a job. And so the responsible thing, quote unquote, would be to stay living here and saving money and trying to limit my expenses as much as possible while I don't have a job. But that became really tricky because, you know, my living environment started to really negatively affect me. It started to impact my mind, my body, my spirit. And at the time I also had horrible, horrible acne. And I believe like part of the reason why I had acne was just, it was all perpetuated by the stress and anxiety of living in this environment. Because I didn't have a job, it also brought me face to face with this question of like, am I unlovable if I don't have a job? Like, is my only value in this world whether or not I have a job? Like, that was such a mind-boggling thing for me, because I'm like, now that I don't have a job, I feel like no one knows what to talk to me about. And I also don't know what to talk to them about. And I was becoming a lot more insular, of just like really wanting to focus on my own healing and my own vision. And I didn't feel like I could explain my vision in a way where people would understand. And so that caused me to really sort of like pick and choose when I would use my voice. And, I was also finding that whenever I would use my voice and speak up about anything within this environment, it often lead to an argument. And I just like couldn't cope with it. Like I couldn't exist in a space where everything that came out of my mouth ended in an argument. Like I just didn't have the mental or emotional capacity for it. And so I started just going inward even more. And that was really the only way I knew how to cope with being where I was at that time. And to take it a step further, I even just noticed myself, sitting at the dinner table every night, and my posture started to change. My shoulders started to hunch over. My eye gaze started being only at the ground all the time. And that was really sort of a red flag for me, because I'm like, I've always been somebody who's had really great posture. Like I grew up as a dancer. Like posture is my number one thing that I've never struggled with. And so for me to notice like physically I'm now hunched over, that's a huge issue. I just desperately needed to get out. And I think the question that I really had to face in this first phase of my Saturn return was like, where am I not stepping into adulthood? And for me, it was around choosing to save all this money, but sacrificing myself and my living environment for it. So, I'm staring at this healthy amount of money in my bank account, more money than I know what to do with. But I'm choosing to live in this environment that's making me miserable on a day-to-day basis. Like something has to change. And that's the thing that needed to change. I knew, though, that I was going to have to open up an income stream in order for me to feel really good about moving out. Like that was just kind of a non-negotiable for me. So during this first pass of my Saturn return was when I really started to reach out to my connections to find a new job. And actually May 18th, 2022, which was the last day of this first pass of my Saturn return, that was the first interview that I had. And while I didn't ultimately move forward with that job, it served as a way to get myself out there, and two, to start gaining momentum. Okay, so now we move on to the second pass, which was June 22nd, 2022 to July 15th, 2022. This was when Saturn was in retrograde, and this was also when shit was hitting the fan. I was coming even more face to face with all the lessons that I had to learn. I had to really dig deep and go back and look at all the shit, excavate out all the shit that I've gone through and that I've been holding that's kept me in this spot where I'm having trouble stepping into adulthood. At the time, I had the worst acne I've ever had in my life. Like, I didn't feel at home in my own body, and I really just wanted to jump out of my skin. And what made matters worse was that I was getting really triggered by the dynamic that I was living in. and feeling a lot of grief around having accepted a lot of the behaviors that I just straight up didn't deserve. It was just a really, really difficult time. And I was just only ever coming face to face with the fact that this living environment was bad for my mind, my body, and my soul. Now, before this second pass of my Saturn return, when Saturn went retrograde, I had no idea where I wanted to live. I had zero vision in my mind of what a new space would look like. Where would I feel the most in alignment or excited or in flow or nourished or stable or secure or free? Like, I had no idea what that looked like. But on the first day of the second pass, June 22nd, I suddenly got like immense clarity around where I wanted to live, what I wanted my new space to feel like, what type of environment or what type of like vibe did I want to live around. Everything just started dropping in, and I was like, oh my God, okay. I think I like went on a walk that day and suddenly I had a whole vision of where I wanted to live next. And so that was super comforting to me, of like finally knowing like where I was headed towards and what felt so nourishing to me. And during this second pass, I was doing a lot of, inner child work, shadow work, and doing subconscious healing around those limiting beliefs that I picked up in childhood and, growing up, that was holding me back from, fully stepping into adulthood and fully stepping into, creating stability for myself. And so this meant working through a lot of unprocessed anger and rage. And it also meant looking at my mindset around, lack mentality and just really anything that had to do with money. And I'll say that as I was doing all of this like subconscious reprogramming work, the tool that I turned to and that I really leaned on during this time was the membership through To Be Magnetic. And they have workshops. It's like this online community, and they have workshops where they literally take you step by step through, it's really how to manifest your dream life. But, they take you through how to peel back all the layers of all the programming that you've ever received so that you can start living your life from like new empowering beliefs. And it's all done through like self-hypnosis processes and takes into account like neuroplasticity, psychology, epigenetics, energetics, like all those things. And it was such a wonderful, wonderful support system for me during that time of just like all the excavation work of like, okay, what are all my limiting beliefs here? What's really like running the show? Because your subconscious, whatever your subconscious believes is what ultimately is going to reflect in your reality. So I was like, okay, there's a lot of shit here that I gotta like uncover in my subconscious in order to kind of get on the other side of this. So To Be Magnetic was my number one tool that I turned to. So between the second and third pass, though, I think what's interesting about this is that Saturn was still in retrograde. And so it was almost like this prolonged period of looking at all the limiting beliefs and the shit that I've been, programmed to believe and what I've grown up around. And even during this time, I was having to face a lot of familial limiting beliefs around lack and tradition. And the craziest things were happening because like family members, female family members started to come visit and, out of the blue, but it happened to perfectly align with like what was happening in my Saturn return. So these female family members were coming to visit. I hadn't seen them in like over 10 years. And it's so interesting because these female family members have only ever existed in the context of old structures where women don't have a voice, women don't have power, women don't have money. And it was so sort of jarring for me and triggering for me to be around that, because that, like, everything that these women represented were precisely the things that I was like trying to work through and trying to overcome. And I like viscerally and intuitively knew that I'm supposed to get to the other side of where they are. But it was just so triggering to have to be around them. And like, oh God, it was just, I'm like, I'm sitting right across from you. And I know that everything that you embody and everything that you've lived is like something that I'm supposed to overcome. And if you're sitting here watching this, and like, I wonder if you would agree, because I mean, this is the whole process of like breaking generational cycles. I mean, I think we all in a way have a responsibility for breaking generational cycles. But I think for me, what I was realizing like during this time and in those moments in particular was like, my purpose here on this earth is to really push past every single generational cycle. And I'm here to break it all. And when you really like put it in those words, it's quite overwhelming. But, you know, at the time I was really feeling the weight of that, like sitting across from somebody who I'm like, I will not have your life. And I'm going through all this shit now to move beyond that life. But, you know, by this point, I was clued in enough to what Saturn was asking me to learn, to where I didn't totally spiral in this situation, but I was more so like, okay, it's never been more clear to me on what I need to do. And I just started to get this overwhelming sense of like, okay, I just need to start taking action to show that I am beginning to learn and understand these lessons. So for me, it really became about like, how can I use my resources that I have in the best way possible, in a way that sets me up for where I'm going in this next phase of my life. And so to me, that looked like buying my car outright. I had more than enough money to do this. I ran the numbers many, many times. But to me, I think a car has always represented freedom to me. What it really felt like was me taking ownership over my own freedom. And so that felt really powerful to me to even just like walk into the car dealership and be like, yeah, I'm here to buy my car outright. And all the guys staring at me being like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, you fucking heard me. Like, it was such a moment of power that I will never forget, of just like walking into the car dealership being like, fuck yeah, I'm buying my car. Like, here's a check. You know, it was a win for me on this path of like moving through my Saturn return and like wanting to get to this other side of just building stability for myself. So then I think a month after that, I woke up one morning with this voice in my head saying, get out of your storage unit now. Now, when I moved back from Chicago, I had thrown all of my stuff into my storage unit, thinking, one, I'll be back for it soon. And two, I'm going to be the same exact person I was when I put all of this stuff here. And, you know, COVID hit, 4 years passed, and there I was, 4 years later, having paid all this money for a storage unit. And, oh, by the way, like now I feel like I'm a completely different person and I actually don't resonate with any of the stuff here anymore. And so, you know, as I looked at my allocation of resources and where I was spending my money, it started to feel a lot like I was spending money on keeping this storage unit as a way to like carry baggage from the past into the future. And it was like the carrying cost of it all that was like, wait a minute. The whole point of the Saturn return is like releasing myself from old living environments and moving into a more stable, more nourishing, a more autonomous living environment. And so really, when I thought about this storage unit, I was like, okay, no. I need to release everything in this storage unit because I'm not bringing any of this into this new version of myself. So I started just selling everything in my storage unit. I was donating things. I was like on a mission to get out of this storage unit. And again, like during this time, I was still, doing all of this subconscious reprogramming work, really looking at all the limiting beliefs that sort of kept me in this living environment. I also, I think a few months after this whole storage unit thing, I really kind of sunk my teeth into the fact that grief is not linear. And I took the time to process my grandma's passing. She had passed away, I think, 4 years prior, or 3 or 4 years prior. And, I never really took the time to process because it was all just go, 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 go. And then COVID hit and then the world stopped, but like our priorities shifted and like our day-to-day focus, we were like hyper focused on our health. But I think all of this was coming up at that time to really sink into like, okay, what is keeping me in this living environment? Why do I stick around? What is keeping me here and what do I need to move through? And I think this grief around my grandma's passing was like part of the work and the experiences that I had to process in order to feel good about moving on and feel good about moving forward. Okay, so then we get to the third pass of Saturn. And this is where things start to get a little bit more exciting. So this third pass was from January 15th, 2023 to January 24th, 2023. And this was when, it was a shorter time period than the other phases. And this is when it became even more about taking aligned action to show that I was learning. So in the retrograde period, in the second pass and between passes 2 and 3, I was starting to take action. But when I hit this third pass, I was like, okay, all I'm doing is taking action. Like this is number one priority. And this is precisely when I found the acne treatment that would later clear my skin and go on to just completely change my life. So on a practical level, this third pass was when I was doing all the research around like acne treatment programs and trying to find an acne treatment specialist in my area. And then I went through all the work to like schedule the first appointment and all of that. And actually the first appointment of my acne treatment boot camp ended up being on the very last day of my Saturn return. So January 24th, 2023. Once my face was clear, I could then secure the next step in my career. So it took me from January to May to clear my skin. And then at the end of May, mid-May, I accepted a new job. And then from that point on, I felt like the pieces of my life started to fall into place. Because now that I had an income stream, I could then think about moving out of my living environment of my parents' house. And, this was a test even in and of itself because, I had gone so long of only seeing money go out of my bank account and not seeing money come in. And once I got this job, it almost became this intoxicating feeling of like seeing a bunch of money come in and not a lot of money going out. And I really had to check myself on this, because there was one day where I was like, hold on. I am choosing to stay in this environment. Here I am watching all this money come in and not a lot of money going out. I'm watching my bank account rise, but I'm miserable in my day-to-day life. This cannot be. Like, the alternative solution here has to be that I still see my bank account balance increase at a slightly lower rate, but I'm using some of my money as a resource to get myself my own apartment, my own living space, and have it be this most nourishing, stable, secure living environment. Like that, as soon as I've reframed it that way or posed that question to myself of like, sure, it's great to have all this money coming in and not a lot of money going out, but like it's at the detriment of my mental health. And that's not okay. Like I have to invest my money into my own peace and into my own stability and my own nourishment. It became no question of like, okay, yes, I'm finding myself an apartment. I'm moving out of this home, out of this living environment, and I'm going to create a whole new peaceful space for myself. Now, that was really the journey of my Saturn return. And, you know, I ended my Saturn return when I was 29. I'm now 31 and like firmly on the other side of it. And to me, it's like if I've learned anything from my Saturn return, it's like I have to be hyper aware of anything that comes up related to the theme of my immediate environment, of how I communicate, of how I use my voice. And I have to take action in order to continue progressing in those categories, because that is what I'm here to do in this lifetime. And so for you, if you've been listening to this being like, oh, I wonder, you know, how this relates for me, look up where Saturn is in your natal chart and then look up the lessons associated with the position of Saturn, and just really think about like how have you been learning those lessons? Where do you still need to take steps or aligned action or heal in certain categories in order to continue to prove that you're learning these lessons? Now, I think one of the things that I kept sort of wondering during my own Saturn return was like, how is this time going to change me? So before my Saturn return, my concept of home as the environment that I come back to for stability and for nourishment was completely different. Like I thought of home as my parents' house. And, you know, if I'm so honest about why that was, I think it's because I was single. And, you know, I think I was still holding on to like societal expectations or just programming around the fact that like, because I was single, I almost didn't feel like I deserved to create my own home or create my own stability, which I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but it was really like the very, very, very like underground sort of belief that was sort of driving me. And, you know, I think my concept of stability also centered around my parents. And, you know, I think that made a lot of sense in the fact that like, okay, when we're growing up, our concept of stability is centered around our parents because that's what we need for survival. But, you know, as somebody in their late 20s at the time who's like fully an adult, that concept of stability no longer makes sense. And, you know, I was finding that what was once the medicine was then becoming the poison. That environment was hurting me mentally and emotionally, and it was also manifesting physically in the form of acne. Now, after my Saturn return, I think my outlook has really shifted to like, I create my own stability. I am my own stability. I have all the resources I need to create my own stability in any given moment. And, you know, my home is a peaceful place where my nervous system can fully relax. I can have all the most nourishing things I want to have in my home. I can have the food that feels really nourishing. I can control or specify the type of content that is playing in the household, what type of content is going into my ears and into my brain and sinking into my subconscious, and how, like, by being able to specify and, you know, have full say over the content that plays, I can really focus on filling my brain with only the most positive, nourishing content. And most of all, I think it really feels like there's been a clear line that's been drawn in the sand of like, okay, I no longer source my stability from my parents. And I think that's been really the most game-changing thing. And if you think back to kind of the ultimate question of a Saturn return of like, where are you not stepping into adulthood? I mean, this is such a clear example of like, okay, yeah, I wasn't stepping into adulthood because I was still like clinging on to the stability of my parents. And, you know, I think it took all of this kind of excavation work and in working through the mud and the shit that I had to go through to get to this other side of like, no, I am my own stability. Even though my Saturn return is over, like these themes still come up. And like I said, like anything that comes up related to my immediate environment, my communication, how I use my voice, I have to pay extra attention to that. And so I think the more we can kind of clock these moments, the more we can continue to progress and continue to learn different layers of these lessons that we're being asked to learn. It's all just a story of overcoming. And no matter how tough your Saturn return is, I mean, you may be sitting here being like, holy shit, my Saturn return was insane, like insanely tough. Hey, that's only pushing you into the next version of yourself. And the more you can really sink into the mud and sink into the shit that you have to face, the more you're just gonna flourish on the other side. Because again, like, yes, Saturn, like I said, Saturn is a taskmaster, but he's going to reward you for putting all the work in. And by the way, as I was talking about doing all of that subconscious reprogramming work and kind of peeling back all the layers on my limiting beliefs and replacing them with new empowering beliefs, if that piqued your interest and you want to learn more about To Be Magnetic and you're interested in becoming a Pathway member in their yearly membership, what I'll do is include in the description below a code for 15% off your membership. I've been a member for about 4 years now, and it has truly changed my life. Not only has it helped me during my Saturn return, but I use it every single day as part of my support system in moving me consistently into each next phase of my life. Now, for the record, I am not a member of the TBM team. I am just a passionate member who has been doing this work for a while and has seen the benefits and the magic that it could bring to your life. And I want this for you too. So I hope this has been helpful for you. If you're going through your Saturn return right now, just know that you can absolutely make it to the other side. You're going to be okay. And use this as inspiration for, you know, tracking what's going on in your own life and how the events in your life ladder back to these Saturn return sort of themes that you're being asked to learn.